While I'm going through the session, if you've got any questions at all, please put them in the chat. And a quick disclaimer, I only have 45 minutes with you today, so I won't be able to cover absolutely everything in the compliance suite, but I will try to focus on the main features of the compliance suite. And also, hopefully, my dogs will stay nice and well behaved for the rest of the session. All right, so to get started, in the last 6 months, every compliance-related conversation I have had has included at least one of these elements. Either customers don't know where all their data sits, or they do but have no way of controlling where it is sent externally. Everyone wants to secure data, meet GDPR regulations, and others others to manage their data more efficiently. Generally, we're all having similar challenges around this and around remote workers effectively controlling how they work and the endpoints they're using. And most of us are pretty much in the same boat. So there's essentially four key solution areas that I'll take you through today around Microsoft 365 compliance capabilities. First, we'll try to we understand compliance can have different meanings to various teams across the enterprise. For me, it's an outcome of continuous risk management. It is involving compliance teams, risk, legal, privacy, security, IT teams, and nowadays even HR and finance teams as well. And it requires an integrated approach between all of these teams. So compliance management is all about simplifying your risk assessments and mitigation in a more automated way to make your life easier, providing visibility and insights to help meet those compliance requirements. Information protection and governance is basically to help know your data better, protect and govern your data throughout its life cycle in your business. This is often the key starting point for many of our customers in their modern compliance journey. So knowing what sensitive data they have, putting flexible and user-friendly policies for both security and compliance outcomes, and using more automation and intelligence. Internal risk management. These internal risks are often what keep most compliance officers and business leaders up at night. Regardless of negligent or malicious, identifying and being able to take action on internal risks is critical. The ability to quickly identify and manage risks from insiders, employees, or contractors with corporate access, and minimize the impact on corporate compliance, competitive business position, brand reputation. All of that is a priority for organizations today. And last but not least, discovering and responding to your data and to incidents of your data. This is being able to discover relevant data for internal investigations, for litigation, for regulatory requests, and respond to them efficiently. And doing so without having to use multiple solutions, hopefully not multiple vendors, and moving data in and out of your systems to increase that risk. That risk is quite critical. So what I'm going to do is dive into these pillars and show you how Microsoft fits their solution into these particular pillars for your compliance and risk management solutions. To kick things off, information protection and governance. Any vendor worth its salt should provide solutions that enable you to protect and govern your data throughout its life cycle. So whether you've ingested it, all of the maintenance of that data, governing retention, preventing data loss, etc. They should all be able to do this regardless of where the data lives or where it travels to. So naturally, Microsoft are not the only vendors to do this in a unified kind of way. There are other vendors that do it like Varonis and Digital Guardian, which is better, is which is better at what is entirely dependent on opinions. But for today, we'll discuss how Microsoft takes you through this information protection and governance through with their solution. So the exponential growth of data is blurring the traditional organizational boundaries nowadays, and acceleration of collaboration among the workforce and remote workers has made protecting and governing data even more challenging today. Data that is created, stored, and shared across many locations, devices, apps, cloud services, and on-prem, it's evolving, and how you remain compliant is getting even more and more complex. So with the MS compliance solution, it's giving customers the flexibility to implement the necessary controls to meet both internal and external security and compliance requirements. So knowing your data, protecting your data, governing your data, and all the outcomes that are powered in all these outcomes are required to meet your compliance needs are now provided in one solution. And this is just one feature of that solution with MS. So this is including a common approach to data classification, no matter where the data resides. One DLP policy, for example, that can stretch across all of your M365 workloads, management for IT, and also the analytics that you can get in dashboards to monitor and remediate issues surrounding your data. But it's also now including APIs that enables you to integrate, for some like HR systems into your compliance suite, so you can manage that more effectively, for example, when you have joiners and leavers processes. So that's quite nice. If we go into more detail, the first kind of main feature of the compliance suite is Microsoft Information Protection, which used to be called Azure Information Protection. So it's recently been renamed, but effectively, this is Microsoft's DLP solution. It's the tool that you use to be able to create and define security labels to assign to your data. So assigning things like highly confidential, top secret to your documents. And once you have these labels, you can also attach sensitive information types. So that's like your GDPR policies, your PII policies to that data. And when you have your labels, you then attach policies to them to protect them based on what the label is. And when you apply those policies, it will either do things like watermark that document or prevent that document from being sent externally, which are all settings that you can configure. And lastly, encryption and how it's encrypted, whether it's encrypted or not, to make sure that it is sent and stored securely, but also making sure you give access to the right people. So applying the labels and policies can either be manual, so users have to assign a label, which would require time to adopt and training, or automatically, which needs a scanner running in your environment to scan your documents, detect what is in them, and automatically assign labels. But what you need to be conscious of is manual versus automatic is a licensing difference. So the manual element is what you would get in your typical E3 license, where the automation is more likely in your enterprise E5 license, for example. But I'll touch on the licensing a bit later. The next key feature that they've included is DLP for Teams, which works quite nicely, quite seamlessly. Using the same sensitivity labels that you would have created, you can now automatically block messages depending on what that message is, and those messages that contain sensitive information. But you can also help educate your users, around when they send data, to say, are you sure you should be sending this? This is actually GDPR info, just to make sure that they know what they're doing is either right or wrong. So you can create those labels and apply them to your team's channels and your team's chats. Again, I have to let you know there's a specific license requirement for this in the compliance suite, so it doesn't come by default. You need to have a team's DLP license to be able to do this um, for you. The next sort of main feature under information protection and governance is Microsoft Information Governance. So this is your records management, your data governance, which gives you the ability to create policies and retain data based on those policies. So it's giving you one place to manage all of your records based on those policies. And these records could include things like Facebook and Twitter for Business if you have those integrated into M365. So with these tools, you can then demonstrate compliance because you can then show proof of how you're disposing of the data, how you're deleting it after, whether it's 5 years or 7 years, depending on what your requirements are, and also show quite detailed audit trails of your data disposition. So if you don't have a records management solution, this is quite useful. I'm just going to pivot over to Compliance Manager just to show you a bit of what you can expect in terms of information protection. So I've opened up compliance.microsoft.com. On my homepage, you'll see right away your compliance score, but I'll touch on this in a bit more detail later. If you're using Cloud App Security, you can integrate that into Compliance Manager and see your high-risk applications, the compliance of your applications, files that are shared publicly, and your shadow IT apps. Again, this is with Cloud App Security, but also you'll see things like your DLP matches, your retention policies, and how those are shared across the different things. I'm currently using a Microsoft tenant, so not a lot of information to show you, but hopefully you get the idea of what you can expect there. In terms of DLP and information protection, I've created basically a demo DLP policy to show you today. So you can create a DLP policy relatively easily. But we all know in practice it's totally different. So what I've done is create a demo one just to show you what you can expect in terms of what you can configure. So where do you want to apply this policy to stop that data from being removed? If you don't have Teams DLP, you just won't see the option here in the middle for Teams chat and channels. But you can see you can enable your DLP policy on everything that's within M365 and on data that you're ingesting into M365. So that's quite nice to have that centralized manageability. In terms of the DLP rules that you can configure, for this particular example, it's just general US security numbers, international classification for diseases stuff, some medical stuff. And you can configure the actions to take. So notify someone when they're breaching or doing something they shouldn't be, restricting those activities, whether that's on devices or in their emails, and also sending alerts to your administrators. Also, it's relatively easy to create rules. You can just go in, add conditions, add exceptions and the actions, and it's tried to make it as simple as possible, if I'm being honest. So that's relatively straightforward. And you can test it out first. You don't have to run it right away. Show tips as and when while you're training people, or just turn it off while you're testing things out. But at a high level, that's one of the ways you can create a DLP policy. And you can do this for different types of data. There's a lot of built-in templates that can help you do this. Newly added fairly recently is endpoint DLP settings. So you can now add in file path exclusions if you don't want anybody accessing data or sending data from specific file paths, um, any unallowed apps, so they've expanded this out just a little bit more, which is quite nice. And you can also disallow certain browsers, but this is all quite highly configurable. Another thing around information protection, so around those labels I was mentioning, you'll have a list of all of the labels available to you, but you can absolutely change these, add labels, configure them how you'd like, and then effectively, detail what happens when with each label and the scope of that label. So if it will just be on files or just be on emails, for example. So as you can see with the highly confidential label, it's going to be file and email. It's going to be enabling encryption, and you can put a watermark on it. But obviously, these settings are all configurable to make sense for yourselves. So at a high level, that's some of the labeling capabilities. The automatic labeling, that you can do. Again, there's a feature difference just to remind everybody. So the automation is usually with an E5 license, but I'll touch on that when I cover the licensing aspect. So these labels by default will be manually assigned on your documents by your users or by yourselves, for example. So just to pivot back to the Prezo, we'll go on to the next pillar, which is insider risk management. So in terms of this pillar, internal risks are often, what's keeping us up at night, right? Trying to make sure that all of those risks are kept in control, that we're monitoring effectively, that we're not losing any data to anybody. So you need to be able to quickly identify those risks and manage those risks for yourselves. And there's quite a broad range of them, right? And identifying them very quickly and intelligently is not easy to do unless you have a tool running behind you using machine learning to detect all of this. And this is now one of the blades, if I can call it that, that's a part of the compliance suite. So because it's hard to maintain that trust without the visibility, the processes and control, you now have what's called insider risk management, which I'll show you in a bit. That gives you a lot of the visibility around, some of these things that you'll see in terms of fraud, insider trading, data leaks, for example, and it's basically monitoring what's going on with the data and letting you know when it's spotting something that really shouldn't be happening, which can be quite useful. On insider risk management, it's leveraging what's called Microsoft Graph and a few other services to obtain signals from Office, from Windows, from Azure, including your file activity, like I mentioned, communications, abnormal user behaviors, for example. And it's also where you can integrate your HR systems, like I mentioned, for your joiners and leavers process. So if you do integrate and HR says this person has resigned, they'll be leaving, you can then track and monitor that user activity to see if they start copying files to a USB device in large amounts, for example. And it becomes a really powerful tool when it's set up. So it's got some built-in playbooks. So to pick up things like IP theft, confidentiality breaches, security violations, and this is all using machine learning in the background to provide intelligence on what exactly is happening in those patterns and risks that it's identifying. So quite a powerful tool that they've built in there. It's also giving you a nice 360 degree view so that you have one place to look at all of this, one place to do your investigations, to create your case if you do have a case, and monitoring those users, those policies, So yeah, I quite like insider risk management. But yeah, that's one of the things you can use within the tool suite. Um, the next sort of key feature is communication compliance. So it's also fairly new, but it basically helps you to address code of conduct policy violations in your company communications. Um, so it supports a number of different compliance, I suppose, requirements, so to speak. So it's checking your Exchange, email, Teams, Skype for Business, also Twitter, Facebook, if you've integrated them in, and it's looking at the details of what is going on in those messages. So identifying specific words and phrases, and it's using machine learning again to pick out if there's any harassment going on, if there's any threats, if people are using profanity, um, if somebody is sending offensive pictures to someone else, and then it basically alerts you that there's something going on and it needs to potentially be investigated. Um, you can also build your own trainable classifiers that understand the meaning and context that are unique to your own organization, to try and prevent, false positives. But I'll show you in a bit the type of policies that you can create with communication compliance. Um, so if somebody is flagged, for example, um, the designated supervisor that's created within that policy will be alerted, and they'll have a review process to see what exactly has been said. And it also allows them from within the console to then act on what's been discovered. So it includes features like historical user context, past violations, consolidating conversations, and keyword highlighting, which is also quite intelligent. And together they allow you to quickly triage a violation and take the appropriate actions if you need to. So this is an interesting one, but yeah, fairly recently added to the suite. Privileged access management. I mean, if you're enforcing a zero standing access policy in your environment by privileged users, then PAM is potentially something that you can use. So, for example, if an admin wants to take an action like a journal rule to exfiltrate data from a CEO's mailbox without anyone knowing, PAM doesn't necessarily let you do that if you configure it. So you can control privileged access by requiring admins to elevate their permissions to execute certain high risk tasks. And that can provide you with an audit trail and monitoring of what that admin is doing. Additionally, when that access is provided, it's it's not only scoped to the specific task, but it's also limited to the amount of time you can complete that task. So you're just in time access. Like I mentioned, everything once enabled, all of your admin tasks are auditable. But if you've got Linux root accounts, I mean, PAM is absolutely useless. Um, it's only covering your Microsoft accounts. It's not going to touch your Linux root accounts. So in that scenario, you might need something that's more agnostic, like Psychotic or CyberArk, that can do a range of different admin accounts. I'll just pivot over quickly to give you a quick view of comms compliance on the Compliance Manager console. So what you'll see when you click communication compliance is the policy that you would have created. On the right, there's some recommended policies that you can create, and it gives you some steps to do that. I have just done a basic demo policy just to show you what you can do with it. So it can be applied to specific users or to everyone, or you can exclude certain groups. You certainly need to have somebody to review this. So it might be an HR person, or someone in the compliance office that can review this, and you would add those details in there. You also want to select where exactly you'll be monitoring uh, these communications, so to speak. So you can just limit that to Exchange or limit it to Teams. And if you ingested any data, it will show those third-party sources of data on the bottom here. It's loading up, but there isn't actually anything to show in the demo environment. And then you can control whether you're monitoring inbound or outbound communication and set the conditions of what you want to be monitoring. So you can start to see, monitoring harassment and profanity, like I mentioned, but also adult images, gory images. If you don't want these things, being used in your workplace, you can now start to track and see who's sending such things and alerting your HR teams and your admins around those conditions and how they've been used. So at a high level, once you create this policy, you'll then get to you'll get alerts and reports around it. Nobody's breached this policy at the moment, so this is going to be blank. But yeah, at a high level, that's what you can expect from communications compliance. Unfortunately, I can't demo PAM for you, but at a high level, this is what you can expect from there. Insider risk management as well, it's quite limited because of the demo environment, so not a lot to show. But effectively, you have the same kind of controls in terms of the policies that you can create and how you create those policies, what exactly is in those policies. I mean, it's relatively straightforward, the same kind of details, but as you can see, these are airing up, so not much to show for this session, unfortunately. Just to pivot back then to the third pillar, discover and respond. And this is all about discovering your data and about responding to anything that's going on with your data. So to continue to meet legal, business, and regulatory compliance challenges, you must be able to keep and protect important information and quickly find what's relevant and what isn't. Spending days, if not weeks, manually sifting through files to find a small number of things is just, it doesn't make sense anymore. And it also costs a lot to be able to do that. Now, within M365, there are inherent, tools to do your data discovery for you. But I'll be upfront, and from the feedback I've gotten, it's not as great as some of the other vendors that you can get out there, especially if you're doing data discovery on stuff outside of Microsoft, so on Linux servers or your NetApps and things like that. There's potential to be some problems. But within the M365 environment, the data discovery element is quite robust and it works really well with their software. So there are vendors that are more agnostic out there that can do data discovery potentially better than Microsoft, depending on your opinion. But yeah, that's something to just keep in mind when doing data discovery. So we know that data is exploding. It's getting more and more complex. We now have to monitor chats, SMSs as well. And this is posing a lot of challenges for customers and for pretty much everyone I've spoken to in the last few months. And even though it's exploding, it's also the compliance regulations that you have to meet are changing. So they're getting more and more complicated because depending on the businesses you work with, you might have different regulations that you need to follow. So this is quite a big challenge, and to be able to manage it efficiently and effectively has become more and more important if you have to meet these different regulations. So what they've done, and if you're not aware, is give you the ability to sift through data, to search through your data and be able to fulfill your DSR requests, so your data subject requests, for example, that are required for GDPR. And they've included this functionality within the compliance suite of product sets. In terms of the content searching, they have in place what's called EDiscovery. So you can get EDiscovery, I think, with your E3 license, basically giving you the functionality to do content searches across everything that's in M365. So if you think back just 5 years ago, how would you have been able to search through Exchange and SharePoint and collect all of the data and save it in one place and export it? I mean, it was nigh on impossible to do that without involving other companies to do your your e-discovery. So this is probably one of the more cooler tools that we've got in the compliance suite now, which is giving you the ability to do e-discovery with data in M365, as well as data that you've ingested into M365. And this data is indexed in place, allowing those searches to be performed without having to move data from one place to another, preparing data and all of that. It's giving you one place to do your data searches and your DSRs, for example, within the M365 suite. So eDiscovery helps you to further reduce your data volume and the preparation you need if you have to do litigation holds, or if you're doing an investigation to someone and it needs to be sent over to lawyers. It's got those tools built in now to help you manage that and to help you do that from within the platform. In addition to the cost and the efficiency savings, there's a reduction in risk as well, because that data doesn't have to be sent off-site anymore unless it absolutely has to. So it's really important to use this e-discovery tool, and also around the permissions of the e-discovery tool. I mean, that is relatively important, and I'll show you why in a minute. Advanced e-discovery is again a licensing difference. So advanced e-discovery comes with the E5 suite. And it still enables you to find all of the relevant data to your case or to whatever you need to investigate, but it also has the custodian management. So you don't have to have complex scripting to identify SharePoint URLs or mailboxes. Now you literally type in who you're looking for or what you're looking for, and in the background the content is mapped and collated for you. So it's quite powerful. With the indexing that's included when you run a search, it's tuned for performance off the bat. You don't have to do any tuning for yourself. It's just tuned to perform right out of the box. And I've seen some of these searches, I mean, depending on what you search for, it doesn't take very long at all. And when you ingest that data or any data, it's indexed as it's ingested. So it makes this run really, really quickly. But yeah, that's something you can do with advanced e-discovery. You can then review and manage the data and redact data as well from within the e-discovery portal. And also in your searches, machine learning will remove any duplicates that are there and also identify not just the content you're looking for, but potentially high value content as well. And it will bring that to the fore so you can see exactly what that e-discovery search has found. I'll pivot over again quickly just to show you the searches. I've actually pre-run some of these searches because I didn't want to have to make everyone wait. So an example of a content search that I created earlier, I called it demo content search. And effectively what I did was I searched for the word patent. So it didn't take very long. I mean, it took about 20 seconds. But that's, I'm guessing, because it's a small environment. And it was able to tell me it found patent in 11 places. It searched all the sites and all the public folders. And you can see some of the details around those 11 items and the locations. I'll show you. So between Exchange and SharePoint, and also the two users where the word patent was used and the SharePoint sites. You can then export these results and export the report and review the report from here. Microsoft doesn't let me export these. I've tried already, but you get the idea, hopefully, that you can export this and have a view of where this pattern search or the word patent was used, and deep dive into why it was used. In terms of the DSRs, there's a section just for your data subject requests. I've done a demo DSR already and searched for everything to do with the admin account. So when I mentioned permissions earlier, when you do a DSR or any sort of e-discovery, it brings back everything, but it can also then show you exactly what's in, email. So it's not a tool that you use lightly, and you have to manage permissions very carefully because, as you can see, I can see the emails of where this particular search was done. So imagine somebody having discovery manager permissions. They can just log in, create a case, search, and they can see anybody's emails effectively. So it's not something you use lightly. It's quite powerful, but that search has brought back all the emails and documents related to the user that I said I wanted to search for. In this case, it was the admin user. From here, you can then save the search results, or you can export the search results. And if you need to, you can then do your litigation holds if there's investigations, and if you have advanced e-discovery. You can then carry on with the investigations. It's all in one place, and you can just go back and refer to it. It doesn't have to search all over again. It keeps that in a nice collated place. So I quite like how advanced e-discovery works, and the demo case data subject requests anyway, and how they work. So yeah, at a high level, that's what you can expect to see when you run a search from Compliance Manager. We're getting close to the end now, but we've just got one more pillar to get through. And lastly, but certainly not least, is compliance management. So I have to remind everyone that there is still a shared responsibility model when it comes to compliance and all of the data and the classification of that data and accountability of the data that's sitting within M365. It is very much a customer problem more than anything else. So we just have to remain cognizant of the fact that even though it's in M365, the data management, the data classification, the data backups are still our responsibility to maintain. So with that in mind, compliance score and compliance manager help you simplify that compliance that you need to maintain and reduce the risks, right? It's helping you demystify your compliance needs and making it easy for IT admins or compliance officers to help, customers manage their data and their data protection controls, meeting compliance requirements. So even if you're not an expert in complex regulations like GDPR, you can still quickly learn the actions required and recommended, and it will show you exactly what you need to do to meet that compliance. So with Compliance Score, you can now continuously assess and monitor your data protection controls, and you can get guidance on how to improve your score and reduce those compliance risks. But it's also leveraging built-in tools, built-in templates, trying to make your life as easy as possible effectively to help manage your compliance efforts across all sorts of different standards. And I'll show you a list of those standards in a moment. So with Compliance Manager, it's doing those assessments in the background. If, for example, you change something in Active Directory, like turn on MFA, for example, it will pick that up in Compliance Score that you've done a task, and it will improve your score automatically, which is quite nice. It'll also give you recommendations on things you need to configure to get your compliance score as high as possible. And it will include things from your information governance, from device management, if there are any, to help you improve your score overall. So it's quite nice. I mean, for risk managers and compliance professionals, there's also tools to help you look at, the details of GDPR, ISO, HIPAA, and hundreds more, if I'm being honest. And you can see exactly what those compliance requirements need you to complete within the compliance manager tool set. So yeah, I'll show you in a moment what you can expect to see around the compliance score. So let's just go to compliance manager. So right now it's scoring me at 70%. It's measuring me against Microsoft's default data protection baseline. And it's giving me points according to that baseline. But for me personally, which might be an unpopular opinion, I don't really find this useful because they've created a data protection baseline that might not necessarily have anything to do with my business. So I'll tell you why I say that in a moment. If you look at the assessment, this is the baseline it's running my compliance score against. If you deep dive into what that includes, you'll see it's got NIST in there. It's got ISO and something called FedRAMP. And honestly, like this might not mean anything for me personally. I might only care about GDPR. So for me personally, what I would do in terms of these assessments is to create my own assessments and my own templates with what's provided. So you get a bunch of assessment templates available to you already. If, for example, Cyber Essentials, I think I saw it here. If it's Cyber Essentials that you need to meet, I would rather have my compliance score show me the details of Cyber Essentials. So it's got the controls in there. And when you meet a control, you can just configure that you've met it. But you can then create your assessment to use Cyber Essentials, and you can also export this into Excel. So what I've seen other companies do, which we recommend as well, is if you need to meet Cyber Essentials and GDPR and Center for Information Security standards, for example, you can export those into Excel, and you can then create one baseline template with all of them and just add that template into Compliance Manager. So once you can get a sample file of this Excel, but you can upload that adjusted one and use that template to show your compliance score. And then it makes a bit more sense than just the generic Microsoft one. So there's assessment templates that you can use. There's quite a lot of them. I mean, if you look at the different, there's just so many. So you can pick and choose what makes sense for you. What I've also seen some customers do that are Power BI houses, for example, is they export the Excel for what they want and then go and build out their Power BI dashboards based on that. If they don't want to use Compliance Manager and Compliance Score. But it's my 2 cents on that. I mean, different strokes for different folks, but I think that would make a lot more sense and be more useful if it's tied to the compliance requirements you specifically have, rather than just a generic Microsoft data protection baseline. So yeah, you can see how it breaks down the compliance score with the arbitrary points that it assigns. But yeah, you can have a view of that and have those key actions and recommendations that you can fill out to basically improve your score and look at the things that are affecting your score and what environments are affecting your score. So it provides quite a useful thing when monitoring your overall compliance. So at a high level, that's essentially compliance score and compliance manager and the assessments. Just to quickly touch on the licensing. So the compliance suite can be bought in a bundle, as you can see, but there's also smaller bundles. So just the EDiscovery audit bundle, just insider risk management, or just information protection governance. And as you can see, there's Teams DLP. So it's it's not just something you have off the bat with an E3, for example, or with Teams. So you just need to be conscious of that. But yeah, these are the different bundles that you can purchase. I'm not touching on Cloud App Security today. It's actually my favorite, but it actually takes an hour to get through it. So I think my colleague Bruce is going to touch a bit on Cloud App Security and how it integrates with a few of the Microsoft tools. But yeah, that's at a high level the compliance elements. I'm just cognizant of time, but we're almost there. So how Bytes can help, if you'd like an overview of all of the compliance elements and maybe a deeper dive into those elements, we're happy to help with that. Microsoft does have funding for some workshops. There's a few things you need to have to qualify for it. I think it's based on the number of users as well. And you can do a deep dive into each element and look at how you can potentially do that for yourself. There's also fast track if you haven't adopted any of these compliance features. And again, if you qualify, you can absolutely take that up, and that's funded by Microsoft as well. If the licensing gets too complex, we do have licensing specialists in-house that can help work through the licensing and give you what makes the most sense for your particular environment. You just need to speak to your account manager or email us at Tell Me More. And yeah, there is a feedback form and there's some Amazon vouchers up for grabs. So please fill out the feedback form. I wish we'd had more time to be able to run through questions. But I'm conscious you also have other sessions to jump on and you need at least a comfort break between sessions. So I hope that was useful for everybody. And yeah, please reach out to us if you have any questions or if you want to dive into any of these features in more detail. Thank you very much, everyone.